Hello, students of Miss Hogan. My name is Mr. Kim, and I teach ceramic sculpture and contemporary art making at Walpole High School. Today, I'll be talking to you about the Renaissance, specifically Renaissance art, which is a little ironic since my own artwork looks nothing like Renaissance art, and the art pieces that I'm most interested in are usually the weird ones that make everyone question if it's art in the first place. My artwork is all about breaking traditional art rules and making everything awkward or illogical, while the Renaissance was very much about modeling beauty or capturing a heightened sense of reality and emotion, such as defiance or sorrow or betrayal. But I do yearn to be a well rounded artist and not live in a world of ignorance, so I can at least appreciate the depth of commitment and curiosity that Renaissance artists had. Maybe it's because I have a wild imagination or overly empathetic every time I look at Renaissance artwork. I just imagine how long it must have taken them to do those pieces during a time when you couldn't run to Michael's to grab a tube of red paint if you ran out. They had to make all of their colors from scratch with whatever they could find in nature or afford, usually funded by patrons or rich people who just really liked art, like the Medici family. If I'm honest with you, when I was a teenager looking at Renaissance art, I thought looked all the same and it was boring and I couldn't relate to it or find it very interesting. But as I learned more about it during art school and probably just matured a little as a human being, I've really grown to appreciate it, especially because a lot of traditions invented or discovered, or however you want to define technique and creativity, still resonate in art today. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but it was a time of such great intelligence and innovation that I feel like we will never experience this in our lifetime and could only imagine what that world was like. I mean, during this time, America was discovered. Shakespeare was writing his plays over in England. They were able to dissect the human body finally and learn about human anatomy. Even ice cream was invented during the Renaissance, and I guess who doesn't like ice cream? Maybe things will change and we'll see a new renaissance when there's flying cars, or we meet aliens, or there's finally free Wi Fi floating in the skies for everybody, but who knows? The first thing you have to consider is that the visual arts, or the arts in general, had a different level of respect that they do nowadays. Back then during the Renaissance, sure, artists were still poor. Even Leonardo da Vinci could he barely had a penny to his name when he died. And most parents just still discourage their kids from going to art school or joining apprenticeships, especially Michelangelo's. But it was the only visual entertainment and the only means of documentation that they had. So they really valued the visual arts. There was no Instagram or YouTube. The printing press had just been invented. So it wasn't like people were getting to experience these visual things through a textbook. And as I'm sure you know, there was no camera invented, so a painting also documented history. So think of all those useless photos you have on your phone of you blowing out candles on your birthday or whatnot. And I'm sure those photos mean nothing to everybody else, but they still hold sentimental value for yourself. But they didn't have that during the Renaissance, which sounds kind of depressing. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that they had a deep appreciation for what they did have, whether it was a painting or a mural or a statue or architecture. So much to the point that the word design comes from the word designo, diseg, designo. I don't know, which also means sign of God, which was this idea that these artists were so talented that it had to have been a gift from God, this magical thing that we nowadays call, in quotes, talent. Now, I don't know what it's like to be born with talent because no matter how great of an artwork I may think I make or how easy something I do seems, it takes a lot of hard work and mental self sabotage to get there. But it's ironic that an idea from the 1400s, some people think if you're good at something that you have to be born with it or it's a sign of God. Anyway, the Renaissance was so epic that they called it the rebirth. They thought of the Middle Ages, which was the time before it, as a decline in culture, so they sought to revitalize their culture through emphasizing or re emphasizing classical texts and philosophies from ancient Greek and Rome. This happened because during the Crusades, Europeans encountered many Middle Eastern civilizations that seemed more advanced culturally, mainly because they had kept up with many of the Greek and Roman texts that have been destroyed or lost in Europe, so the Crusaders brought them back with them. Another event that helped to usher in ideas of the Renaissance was the plague known as the Black Death. This caused people to question the church's emphasis on the afterlife and focus more on the present moment and the human experience, which is a huge element of Renaissance philosophy. To give you an idea of how epic artists were during the Renaissance, I'll introduce to you Leonardo da Vinci. He painted, he sculpted. This was his first sculpture ever, by the way. He wrote, he invented instruments, discovered the proportions for a perfect human being, drew ideas for flying machines and army tanks way before they were even considered or obviously invented. He had so many important ideas that these sketches would be used as outlines by many future scientists and inventors. He also invented many different kinds of military strategies, like the very first wetsuit, which its sole purpose would be used as a way to attack enemies underwater. He was so afraid that other people would steal his ideas and claim them as their own, or simply use things like his military strategies in a hurtful way that he invented his own language so no one can decipher how he is describing how to create these objects. And then he also wrote that invented language backwards. Which, if you didn't know that and you saw these huge anthologies of his sketchbooks printed in modern day text, you might wonder what language they were in. The answer is, well, it's in Leonardo's language. His application of mathematics, deep understanding of the human body, and the emotion he was able to bring to create believable but beautiful human expression, it was from Da Vinci that the term Renaissance man emerged, which basically describes a person who can do it all. He would study dead human cadavers in the basements of churches for so long that he would get sick from the smell, and as popular as this fresco mural is, it is complete genius to not only paint the Last Supper, but to paint the exact moment after Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." I mean, this was pretty much the Renaissance version of an episode of The Real Housewives of New York. And no, Judas doesn't seem sketchy or uncomfortable at all. Well, he even spilled the salt, which is also where that superstition comes from. Thanks, Leo. Color and design were two huge aspects of Renaissance art. In terms of design, this was the first time linear perspective was ever invented, which is a mathematical scientific way of accurately depicting real space in a flat artwork. Since the vanishing point, or the area where all angles lead to, was the most important part of linear perspective, artists often put angels or Jesus or Mary at the heart of the vanishing point. In contrast, techniques to create atmospheric perspective or a fake sense of space was also being discovered. Atmospheric perspective is a technique used to create an illusion of depth by painting distant objects with less clarity and tone. Artists played with dramatic applications of dark and light that obviously did not exist in real life, but created more of a realistic illusion or emphasis on certain areas of the drawings or paintings, or just gave the viewer a sense of infinite space. Another popular aspect of Renaissance art was the contrapposto pose. Artists thought that this pose created more visual movement for the viewer and seemed more relaxed than a human standing with their feet tightly together, lock-kneed. I actually honestly don't know much about the contrapposto pose, and while I could Google it for you right now, I'm sure you can do that on your own fun time like you normally do. I guess I'll admit that the pose seems more casual and less stuffy than the statues from the Greek antiquity. Another aspect of Renaissance art was the use of red and blue. Contrary to popular belief, Renaissance artists may have been using symbolism and metaphor through their depictions of objects or animals in their paintings, but color symbolism was not a major concern of theirs. So thus, red and blue weren't holy colors or didn't mean to represent male or female. The real reason why you see Mary, Jesus, important biblical figures, or even public figures in mostly blue and red is because to make those colors, it costs the most money. So in their eyes, if you see a person wearing red or blue or both in a painting, they most likely were very important figures during the Renaissance. Finally, artists were always trying to find ways to put themselves in their own artworks. Yes, nonchalant self portraits. Although this isn't a specific aspect of Renaissance art, I still think it's cool when people can be serious with a sense of humor. Artists were really, really competitive. They always tried to steal each other's patrons or jobs. They spied on each other's artworks in order to one up each other. And while doing that, they would do this weird thing where they would try to include their own faces in their own artworks, almost like a Renaissance version of Where's Waldo. Bonus reel! While I'm sure that a few of you were entertained by my little art historical analysis, or most of you are probably ambivalent, and the rest of you are ignoring me and just singing Harry Styles songs in your head, I can't talk about the Renaissance without mentioning the Northern Renaissance and my absolute favorite artist and artwork, artist Hieronymus Bosch and his Garden of Earthly Delights. The piece is known as a triptych, which is basically a portable artwork that is meant to tell three different stories or narratives, used to educate the illiterate, usually of scriptures from the Bible. This is what the Garden of Earthly Delights looks like when closed, and this is what the triptych looks like when it's opened or almost fully opened, and this is what the three panels look like when completely opened. Sadly, there is very little known about Hieronymus Bosch's life, but we do know that this piece starts with the creation of Adam and Eve and ends with the end of days. And no, while this isn't a direct translation of the Bible, at least I'm pretty sure this didn't happen in the Bible, I think Bosch's methods of displaying sin is so disturbing, bizarre, and kind of futuristic that it makes me sad to know that his life and artistic goals were completely undocumented. For me, none of the Renaissance artists were using their imagination as wholeheartedly as Bosch was, other than Da Vinci. I mean, in this picture, there's a. And this guy is, well. And these two are. Well, sorry if these pictures are too much for you, but I honestly could stare at this thing for hours and still find things I never even noticed before. I am not sure if I gave you any valuable information as you start your own quest in studying Renaissance artworks, but I hope that at least, like my own experiences, you are able to develop an appreciation for how complicated and hardworking artists were during a time where, yes, there were major innovations and discoveries made, but compared to today, lacked a serious amount of resources, but were still able to demonstrate the power of what making art is really about: curiosity and determination.